Welcome to the Speckled Truth Podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, this is Captain Chris from the Speckled Truth. I want to thank you for joining us for another episode here at the Speckled Truth Podcast. Episode 9, and I got a really special guest here today, all the way from the Northeast Florida area, Captain Matt Chipperfield. Matt, what's up, brother?
How we doing, guys?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Good morning.
Good morning to you, too.
You got some coffee?
Coffee and phone. I'm ready to go, man. I'm settled in. Tell you guys some stories.
I got you, brother. Well, I appreciate it, man, for being on a podcast. I really do. So we were kind of talking a little bit pre-show. Thanks for obviously supporting the podcast and listening to it yourself.
It's fun to listen to, man. It's we're both speckled trout nerds, and we love to learn more about it. And you've got a great forum going to get people together and share the knowledge of this special fish. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, no worries, man. No worries. And it continues with you, bro. And it's a support from you guys that kind of make this endeavor happen, dude. So it's reciprocal. So thank you, buddy. But hey, so for a lot of folks who are following the Speckled Truth Podcast from Virginia to Texas, tell them a little bit about Matt Chipperfield, man. And so about how you got into chartering, et cetera, and really your kind of specialty into speckled trout.
Well, I mean, none of this was planned. I have a kind of a different story than most charter captains and guides do. This wasn't something that, I was brought up to do or was, shown how to do. It's kind of just something I plunged headlong into. But basically, the childhood, I grew up in Jacksonville Beach around the intracoastal waterways and the swamps and marshes and the beaches that we have here. Both my parents are transplants from up north. They're snowbirds that came down to avoid the winters, and neither one of them are water people. They don't fish, they don't surf, they're not watermen. But of course, they had 2 kids, me and my brother, right next to the ocean. We naturally turned into water babies, and me in particular, I have not been able to get away from the water in any type of form, whether it's surfing or fishing, kiteboarding, all that stuff. It's been nice, but. Yeah, as a kid, I fished with a few friends here and there. It was more or less just something to do when the waves were flat. I mainly was a soccer player and a surfer back in the younger days. And when they would take me out, I'd have fun catching some flounder and some redfish here and there. But it was mostly just bait fishing. But I did learn some basic principles of fishing, how to cast and stuff like that. And on occasion, I would go to the local ponds and fish for the old ditch pickles and some largemouth bass and stuff like that. But it wasn't anything serious. It was just stuff to kill time. All that kind of changed when I got my first kayak when I was around 13 years old and started kayak fishing. My parents didn't have access to boats, and I needed something to get out on the water with if I wanted to do any fishing. So I got to sit on top ocean kayak, old Malibu 2. And me and my friends would take it off the beach with 3 of us in that thing, fish for whiting. And we even tried some king fishing out of it, but all we ever caught was sharks. But it was a good time and kind of got a little bit of the fire in me. And then the real, turning point in my fishing career was when I went to school in St. Petersburg and in Eckerd College. I had 4 years in the mangroves, grass flats, and the nearshore fishing scene and the Gulf Coast over by St. Petersburg. And it just so happens my college roommate is Captain Tyler Capella, who was more or less going to school to appease his parents, and he knew very well that he was going to be a charter captain.
Yeah.
And when I showed up and he, saw my Malibu 2 kayak and the fact that I like to fish here and there, we ended up being roommates, junior and senior year. And occasionally we would skip some classes and go pull that kayak around the flats. And that's when he kind of opened my eyes to the world of, soft plastic fishing, hard plastic fishing, fly fishing, fishing the flats, sight fishing, putting eyes on a fish and making a correct cast and all of the technicalities of higher level fishing. That's when I learned with him. And he kind of put the fire in me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was becoming a fisherman more than I was a surfer or an athlete. I started spending more of my time fishing than doing a lot of the other things I did in my spare time. And when I graduated in 2008, I moved back to Jacksonville and started interviewing with a few companies up here for a job. Ended up getting a bartending gig in the meantime to make money, make some ends meet, which left me with a lot of days free. And during those days free, I would take my kayak out and go fishing again, and ended up diving back into a local estuary that is known here as Guana and the Guana River. There's also a large preserve lagoon that's attached to it, and I got in there and started applying what I'd learned in college as far as soft plastics and ambush fishing and topwater use and all that, and started catching monstrous speckled trout in this lagoon, and knew how special big trout were, and just dove headlong into the lagoon. Found paddleboard fishing, started fishing with the boat board company as an ambassador for them, and started entering tournaments competitively to see where I measured up, and actually ended up winning the first tournament that I entered, which was the Jacksonville Kayak Classic, which unfortunately is no longer being run, but it was at the time the longest running kayak tournament in the world. It was over 300 anglers, and ended up catching my personal best trout, which was a 32-incher in the tournament. Rounded it off with a 34-inch red and an 18-inch flounder to win the slam and win the tournament. So yeah, ended up with an 80-something inch slam, and
oh my god,
kind of launched the charter off the back of that. I'd been a bit of a shop rat at a shop called North Guana Outpost that carries the boat boards, and they mentioned that they were looking for a guide, and just started chartering with them, and ended up where I am today on the boat. Kind of just steamrolled from there, and I haven't looked back since. I've just been on the estuary every single day and spending a lot of time fishing and learning, and yeah, it's an addictive process, as you know.
That's awesome, bro. Because I mean, similarly, I grew up obviously underneath the tutelage or as a student of my dad, kind of fishing. But as an athlete, fishing, I can empathize somewhat because when I played ball in a junior college, between practices, between classes, a lot of my teammates and I would go out and fish. And honestly, that's where I met a lot of my lifelong friends, especially that love to pursue the outdoors and particularly fishing in general. So it's pretty interesting that we have at least some. I didn't know you played soccer. I didn't know you had gone to school for that.
Played all the way through college until I wrecked my knee. Unfortunately, sophomore year, I was skateboarding, which was a no-no. Weren't allowed to do it, but I was into extreme sports, so of course I did it anyways. And of course, I paid the price, tore the ACL, and that kind of put me out of the competitive soccer arena. I still play here and there, but yeah, it's mainly just surfing and fishing after that.
Yeah, and so it's funny. Hopefully you don't. I kind of stalked you a little bit, bro. No, but I was looking through your Instagram page, and so if folks are listening out here, definitely go check out Cap Matt in his Instagram page, because we'll talk more about that here in just a second. But I actually saw you because I was kind of going back through. I'm like, I wonder what his personal best, if he's got a picture of that fish. And sure enough, man, it's that picture of that 32-inch. Because I read the caption, and so it was a 32-inch in that particular tournament. And so I didn't know that was kind of like a springboard for you into your guiding endeavor.
I've been catching some big trout, but the whole story behind that tournament is just so unique and cool. And I still think it's probably my coolest fishing moment in my entire career. The only one I could think of that might second that is the trout that I caught this past year with that fish coming out of its face. But
we're gonna spend some time. But so for as a cliffhanger, it's a huge trout with a redfish. yeah, right. I know, with the redfish hanging out of its mouth. Anyway, so all right, so run us through that day then. Why was it so special?
Oh, it's number one. It's just a huge tournament, and it was honestly my first tournament that I've ever entered competitively to fish. I did a lot of pre-fishing for it, took it very seriously, really wanted to win, and I'd only been guiding for a handful of months at that point. So my confidence level wasn't nearly as high as it is now. Mm-hmm. But it's a big tournament. It's a slam format. redfish, trout, and flounder is our Northeast Florida Slam. And whoever gets all three of those in the largest sizes and the largest aggregate slam wins the overall grand champion.
Mhm.
They also had, subcategories, largest trout, largest red, largest flounder, and some other, smallest fish categories, stuff like that they typically have in these paddle tournaments. But I went in with it. Went into it with the goal. I wanted to beat Eddie Cabler. You probably know Eddie. He saw me catching good trout over a couple of years, and kept telling me, "Hey man, you need to enter this tournament. You need to enter this tournament." And I would research it and found out that he had won it a couple times, and was a special. Obviously he specializes in catching really big river trout out in the St. John's and the Intracoastal.
St. John's, yeah.
And my whole goal was just to beat Eddie. I just wanted to catch a trout big enough to beat Eddie. And I launched that morning with about probably 20 other anglers on the bank. And luckily for me, I was on a boat board, and I paddled as hard as I could to get to the school of fish that I knew where they were first. And those were the redfish. And ended up pulling a 34-inch red within about 15 minutes of fishing, which for the area that I'm in that lagoon is a very, very good sized redfish. There's not a whole lot of room to upgrade that fish. So within 15 minutes, I had a 34 red, which is a great way to get on the board. I knew I was in the running to do some damage, and it's like, all right, let's keep it pushing. So I paddled another 3 or 4 miles to the middle of the lagoon where I'm at. It's about a 12-mile long lagoon. Paddled out to the middle and started fishing an area where I had previously the week before caught about a 27-inch trout. So I knew there was probably some fish in the area. I just was going to need to work the area well. Well, I look over my right shoulder, and here comes one of the kayakers that I launched with. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to share the water. Things are going to get a little competitive. And he gets closer, and I realize it was a guy named Chris Schultz, Captain Chris Schultz, who now runs Fish Jacks Charters. And he was a friend of mine that I had been kind of, back and forthing on the forums. We were on some couple forums that we did reports on, and I never actually met him, but I recognized him from the pictures. And he paddled up, and he introduced himself, and very politely asked, can I fish next to you? Is it okay if I fish out here? And I was like, absolutely, man. And kind of gave him the breakdown, like, there's some redfish over here. I caught some good trout over here the other day. Let's hang out and talk and have a good time during the tournament. And so he starts talking about big trout, and I mentioned that I've never caught a 30-incher, and I've been out here for about 2 years at this point. Haven't never caught a 30-incher, caught plenty of 28s, a couple of 29s, but never broke the 30-inch mark. And, no joke, within about 2 minutes after that conversation ended, I was using a cork rig with a soft plastic, kind of popping it and reeling it. And cork goes down, I come tight, and that line cut through the water horizontally about 20 yards, where the water actually got cut by the line and was, had the bubble trail behind it. Yeah. And I knew at that point it's a big trout, because those trout like to, do that big blow up and cut the line through the water. There's no redfish that's going to do that in there. So I knew it was a good one. And then I got it closer, and I got to look at it. And of course, my eyes went wide, started bugging out of my head, turned over to Chris, and I was like, hey man, I think I'm a member of the 30-inch club. And he's like, you gotta be kidding me. He's like, I think so. And I slid this fish up on the board and put it on the tape, and it's 32 on the dot. I didn't get a weight at the time because I didn't have a boga grip, but I would estimate it was around the 10-pound mark. It wasn't overly fat or, huge. It was pretty proportional. Nice big tail, nice big head. Yeah. Tournament was in May, so more than likely the fish had already spawned out, so she wasn't very heavy, but she was a good long fish. And of course, for a tournament that measures in length, it was a great fish. So at that point, I took Chris actually came over and took that picture, which is so clutch to have him there, because I wouldn't have had a picture of that fish with me holding it unless he was there. It just would have been a picture of the fish on the bump board. So he ended up taking a really clutch photo, and I sat there for a minute kind of in shock at what had just happened. And he looked at me and was like, hey man, you need to turn and burn and go get a flounder. Like, you need to go get a flounder so you can win. So the only option I had, the lagoon that I'm in, is not really great for flounder fishing. It's mainly black drum, redfish, and trout. So I had to turn around and paddle about 6 miles back to where I came from, hop over the land bridge that is connected to this lagoon and into the tidal zone, which is the Intracoastal River. And I fished for about 6 hours, pounding, and caught 2 more really good trout, a couple more good reds, but just couldn't find a flounder for my life, and ended up coming all the way back to the ramp right where I started, more or less in what I felt was garbage time, just desperation trying to get a flounder. And luckily the tide had turned and started coming back in where I was fishing. And 15 minutes left to go in the tournament, I got the thump and reeled it in and realized it was a flounder. got it onto the deck and just stomped on it. I was trying to make sure it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And started yelling because I know I'd won the tournament. And it's one of those 3-2-1 fish app tournaments. It's a live login. So you can fish right up until the last second and log in your catches. So I got to live log the catch and watch my name jump from I think 20th place up to first place. So it was a really cool moment. And I was on cloud nine for a couple of days after that. And it was just the way everything went down. I just don't think I'll ever have another day of fishing that comes together the way that day did.
Sure. And you beat Eddie Cabler.
I beat Eddie Cabler. He came up and gave me a solid handshake, and I did a little speech at the ceremony, and I told everybody my goal was to, coming in here was to beat Eddie, and it got a good laugh because that was why I went into it. Eddie kind of pushed me into it, and
sure,
I've looked up to Eddie for a while as far as his abilities with the trout fishing he does. He fishes in a different area in a little bit different way than I do, but the man knows what he's doing when it comes to big trout.
Yeah, and to kind of stay on that for a sec. I mean, I know Eddie. That's a mutual, connection that we have, and I've fished with Eddie, and we've fortunately, man, been able to establish a relationship, Eddie and I, over the course of years. Now, it's kind of hard to believe that it's been, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years, and so I can honestly say, though, as a guy who's been so productive and so successful, is how humble he is. And that's kind of the thing, at least for me, that kind of stands out for a guy like that who has, some tremendous success, very, very well respected, has a great rapport among that kind of area. And so that's kind of the thing that stood out to me, was just fishing with him, is just the level of humility that he has, man. And I think that's kind of what makes him even better, Oh,
yeah, makes him a good person. That's what makes him genuine. You can be a good fisherman and still not be the greatest person to be on a boat with. I've met a couple of those people, but when you share, you can find. I've always found that being a guide, it's fun to get people in tight spaces on a boat where they can't really walk away from you, and you get them engaged in conversation, and you can find out the type of person someone is real fast when they're on a boat with you. It's a great medium to kind of figure out what someone's about, but Eddie is one of those people. I've unfortunately have not had the pleasure of fishing with Eddie yet. He's on the north side, and I'm down towards the south side of St. Augustine, but I'm sure at some point we're going to get on the boat together, and it'd be nice though. But I've met him in public several times, and dude's been nothing short of, first class.
Yeah. So for people who don't understand, I think I have a little bit of a familiarity with it. Obviously the Guana River up there in kind of the St. Aug area. And so you're talking about paddle boarding and kayaking and stuff like that. That is a very unique area, right? Where it's a preserve. So I don't think there's any power boats that can actually fish this area. Is that true?
They are, but they have to be 9.9 horsepower or below, which is basically going to limit you to the majority of what you're going to see out there are Ginus and small, Alumacrafts, boats that are anywhere from 10 to, usually around 14 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to have one of the only flats boats that's in there. I have an Ancona Shadowcast. It's about 16 feet long, but it's a micro skiff designed to be able to be pushed by a 9.9 horsepower motor. There's only about 2 or 3 of those on the market that can get pushed by that. It can get on plane and move, but more importantly, it gets me into the preserve, and I can fish with up to 2 anglers on my boat, me plus 2, and it allows me to get people out of there and let them walk around the boat and not be locked into a Ginu or a Lumacrab. But yeah, it's a very, very unique area as far as the hydrology, and the state recognized how unique it was, and they had to end up purchasing it from a private landowner. And they preserved over 90,000 acres. And in that 90,000 acres is an intracoastal river that flows toward the north with the incoming tide. And it flows north all the way through the Guana Preserve till it meets a fresh watershed known as the Michler watershed. So on the south end, where the water is flowing from with the tide, it's all salt. And then as it meets the fresh water in the middle of this lagoon, it becomes brackish. And then on the very northern end of the lagoon, where the water is flowing towards, is all freshwater. So on the north end, you've got freshwater coming in from the rainwater collection in the swamp, and the watershed. And on the south end, it's fed by an intracoastal river. So you have a brackish body of water very dark tea stain, kind of like Louisiana looking water.
Yeah.
And it creates Guana Lagoon, which is a 12-mile long lagoon. The reason it's so unique is in 1958, they built a land bridge across the Intracoastal Tidal River,
Mm-hmm.
and it flooded the northern end of that lagoon where the freshwater comes in with fresh water, and it cut off the tidal flow into Guana Reserve. The land bridge was put and the dam was put about 12 miles from the northern end of the lagoon. So the lagoon is about 12 miles long, as I said earlier, and there's no tidal flow. The tide doesn't move at all, so there's no oysters, there's no grass flats in the lagoon. It's a wide open body of water, and most of it that's just all dark water with a lot of silt, mud, and some crunchy areas here and there that have some of the old oyster bars that have fallen into the water, or some coquina shells. But for the most part, the lagoon is about 3 feet deep in most areas. Sometimes it can be only inches, and really dark, muddy water. So it's a very, very unique area as far as the hydrology. There's not many areas you're going to see a closed-in lagoon that's fresh on the north end, salt on the south, brackish in the middle, and contains all kinds of sport fish that we all love to catch. And there's also no predators. It's too shallow, and there's no tide, so there's no dolphins, there's no sharks. So that's why we have so many.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there were like any sort of, predators kind of in the area.
Alligators, tons of alligators in there. There's FWC believes there's over 2,000 alligators in 12 miles of lagoon water. So it's a lot of alligators. But again, in the 100-year history that this place has been hunted and fished, these alligators have never attacked a human being. They're all very, very well fed by, turtles, snakes, slow-moving black drum, and all the land animals, raccoons, deer, wild boar, whatever comes across them. But they generally, alligators aren't really the type that's going to go track down a fast-moving fish or a large fish if they don't have to. For the most part, the only fish I've seen them eat are the black drum that get in huge schools, and they do all that thumping, so they know they're right there, and they'll just wait next to the school with their mouth open. But other than that, you're aware the main killer of our trophy-sized speckled trout is usually dolphins. And we don't have them. We don't have any dolphin or porpoise, so there's really nothing inside of that lagoon that's going to eat a trout that's 18 inches or over, unless a bird can swipe it and take off with it. But once they get to be about 18 to 20 inches, there's not a whole lot that's going to come after them. So they just sit around and eat.
Yeah, like you're talking about, though. I mean, like the hydrology, and I'm really interested more so maybe, I guess, how those fish. So, I mean, obviously you have a lot of, for lack of better terms, resident fish, right? They're not really going anywhere.
Most of these fish are, it's hard for me to say. There is no tagging going on in the lagoon. I think I've talked to it before. I need to start tagging in there so I can start understanding some of the movements and the population flux. But with the dam being pretty much closed 90% of the time, most of these fish, especially the trout, are definitely residential fish that are born and bred in the lagoon. We do have some very key indicators as far as the way the fish looks, that this is an inbred population that is experiencing its own form of natural selection and evolution as it's happening right now. We get what we call a lot of spotless guana gators. Some people say they're ugly. I think they're beautiful. They just don't have very many spots. They lose their spots for some reason inside this lagoon with the dark water and the dark bottom and the dark mud we have, and all the tannins that are in it from the fresh water. These fish are losing their spots, and it's clearly an advantageous trait that's being passed forward. These fish without the spots are the ones that are surviving more and are getting larger. And we see a lot of big female trout that with no spots, they actually instead will get really deep purple amethyst colors through the top of their ridges and their face. Their cheeks and their sides will get very, very gold, which is more than likely due to the tannins in the fresh water. And they get a pale silver on the sides. But you've seen those fish that I catch now and then. They're extremely healthy. They're very well fed. The water quality is good. Even the oldest fish, like the 31s, the 32s that we catch, I mean, there's been 33s and 34s caught in there as well. The pictures that you see and the ones you hold, they're just healthy. They're not tattered up. They don't have scars. Their mucous membranes on their fins are all, really well connected and intact. Just really, really healthy fish.
And that's the thing. I mean, right through your Instagram feed, looking at those trout, and I've commented, I think, a number of times on that, is that, man, it is like the picture perfect fish. It doesn't, like you're saying, it doesn't have this tattered end of a tail. These, markings or scars on the back, or, it's just different, right? I mean, actually I posted one, I think yesterday, the one I caught up here in the upper Laguna Madre, which has some really similar characteristics with regards to spots and spots, or lack thereof for that matter. I mean, the one that I just posted just had spots on the very edge of the fin, right where the dorsal meets,
Mm-hmm.
and then right on the tail. And you can almost tell like that's a definite like upper Laguna Madre fish, just because it has these very, very notable large spots. And then not only that, it also has very few of them. So
Yep.
it's interesting. You can kind of tell some of the characteristics of a fish and kind of where that fish maybe came from. So it's pretty interesting.
Yep.
But I have noticed, particularly with your fish, the ones that you've posted, that purple hue, man, that's so beautiful on these fish, and how prominent it
It's my
is in those
favorite color
pictures.
on any fish I've ever caught.
It's
I call
gorgeous,
them
man.
purple-headed demons, and it seems to get a little bit more prominent in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Almost like redfish, like when in the wintertime when they have more oxygen and they're kind of frenzied, that tail gets a little more blue.
Bluer, yeah.
I feel like these trout in the wintertime with a lot of oxygen, when they're feeling real ripe, that purple comes out. I may be wrong, but I don't know. It just feels like that color pops a little more in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And it really depends. What's cool about it too is it really depends on where you caught the fish. If you're catching fish in that lagoon that have been spending most of their lifetime towards the freshwater, you're going to catch a lot of fish, a lot of trout in that freshwater area that are pure gold in the cheeks all the way through the sides, and they may not have any of the green in them at all. It may just be gold and purple with a little bit of a dark back. It just depends on what part of the lagoon they've been, hanging out in, or what part they were born in, what part they decided to feed in. It's all very, very different inside the lagoon, which is one of the reasons I would like to start tagging in there and see where they're going, how long they're there, whether they're making it out of the dam or not, when they are, all that good stuff.
Well, I mean, what I sent you, about 50 tags, maybe less than that, maybe at least 25, 30 maybe tags. I'd be interested to see if you can tag those, and not only that, kind of getting some recapture data. Now, I'm interested to see the recapture data, because if people do recapture it other than yourself, then they're going to call that number.
Mm-hmm.
But I would probably, actually, my dad would probably get the actual recapture report, because they are tagged Louisiana, or I think the CCA Louisiana. So he would get the tag report. So that'd be pretty interested to kind of see. There.
But it's cool about Guana, that being a relatively small lagoon, the recapture rate should be pretty high. So the data, I feel like, will come in faster than it normally would in a spread out area where the fish can migrate or move.
Sure.
These fish aren't moving more than 12 miles if they're staying there. So the recapture rate should be pretty high, which would be cool to see what they're doing, and how where they're going, north, south, east, west, what times of years they're up, down, towards the north end, towards the south end. It's always been fascinated by that. So it'd be cool to just start gathering information on it, and also just to know how many fish of these are actually making it out of the dam, because the dam is open on certain times of the year. It's to drain water, to let water in.
Gotcha.
So there are some fish that are leaving, but I don't know if they're just fish that are towards that end, or if all in general there's a migration toward the saltier end and they all get out then. So I would learn a lot, and I think it would be a faster rate of learn than in a larger open body of water.
Yeah, of course. No, it makes sense too. I mean, the thing that I think most people don't realize, and I've encouraged it for folks that have actually harvested a fish, a big fish for that matter, is to bring the fish to like a Department of Wildlife and Fisheries or a Department of Natural Resources, and let some of those biologists and scientists take a look at that fish, right? They can cut out an otolith, which is the ear bone of the actual fish, right? And so if you've decided to harvest it, you're going to get a replica mount. You obviously got your measurements for that. Get that replica mount, but donate the fish to Department of Natural Resources or Wildlife and Fisheries, because when they cut out that otolith, they can actually tell a lot about a fishery and a fish for that matter. And so one of the guys that submitted a citation last year from Mobile, Alabama, I talked to them and I asked them, I said, hey, this guy registered the fish, but he had to harvest the fish. He was fishing a tournament. He didn't want to, but he was fishing a tournament. You had to bring it in to weigh it in. And so it happened to be like a 28 and a half that was close to 9 pounds, huge fish.
Big fish.
And so when he brought it in, I asked him if they would be interested in him donating it. And I asked him if he would be interested in donating it. And so he said yes. And so they brought it in. And so when they cut out that otolith, they could tell from the growth rings basically what part of the estuary that fish was in during a certain time of its life, right? So from like, let's say between year 3 and 4, based on the growth rings and some of the, some of the nutrients that were in there, they could tell this fish was in the upper part of the estuary during the spring season. It's crazy. They can get pretty specific. It is, right? And so I'd be interested to kind of see if you kind of flip that first domino there in the Guana River of just tagging. Hey, let's take a look at migration. Not only that, if something happens where you did have a gill hooked fish or something where that fish isn't going to make it, if you then harvested that fish, and they could kind of maybe give you maybe a little bit more insight into kind of what's going on. Obviously, I know you guys in that fishery, Aldecina.
Oh yeah.
Was it Justin
Old
Hanby?
Slayer.
Yeah, right.
That's my dude right there.
Anthony Chila, all those guys, Crusher. And so, yeah, obviously pretty close knit group of anglers that fish this area, right? Because it is so unique.
It's very rare that I'll go out for my charters, or I'm usually in there around 4 to 5, sometimes 6 days a week. It's very rare that I don't know most of the people that are launching. It's changed a little bit with the past almost 5 years I've been in there now. Al and Anthony don't get out as much as they used to, but when they show up, they still slay and they still crush. If your nickname is Slayer and Crusher, you're doing something right. They still do their thing. They still do really well. I looked up to those guys when I first got in there, being a kayaker and a paddler, and Al's a paddler too. So I definitely did my fair share of spot stalking here and there with Al and Anthony, seeing where they're at and what they were doing. But eventually, I worked up the nerve to talk to them and found out they were cool people and shared some info with them. And we talk a lot about stuff we see out there. But just being a smaller community, tagging would be a great idea, just because if the people, most of the people that are pretty serious about the trout fishing in there. There's another guy named Sandy who fishes out there as well. Yep. I'm sure he'll be listening to this podcast too. But there's most of us that are serious about it out there are catch and release fishermen for these big trout. And the more that we're catching and releasing and tagging, the more info that's just going to be accumulated, because a lot of these big female trout more than likely have been caught several times over their lifetime. So it would be really cool to start gathering information and just understanding more about the resource and what goes on in there, and apply it to the redfish too. The red fishery in there is incredible. We all know it used to be a lot better. The redfish are unfortunately a bit more susceptible to being overfished in there, because the redfish like to push right up against the dam a lot of times, and the dam does have a large segment of shorebank fishermen that do pretty much harvest everything they catch. So there is a fair amount of occasionally poaching and over harvesting that goes on at the dam when the redfish schools get up against it. So being able to see the number of fish that's actually being taken out, if the tags are being claimed and killed and then reported, you'll know that there's a fair amount of fish that are being removed, and it affects the population. And I would love to be able to work with Florida Fish and Wildlife, FWC, and some of the biologists that are resident in the park, and kind of be able to understand the fish themselves, and how susceptible they are to conditional changes, seasonal changes, overfishing, and have a better understanding of the resource, because this resource is cut off. It's it is apart from all the tidal estuaries, so it does not receive migratory influx of numbers or fish. It is, like we said earlier, born and bred type thing. So it is a delicate area. So far, it's been okay. Water quality is good. The fish numbers are high, but over time, with it gets more popular, you could see a little bit of a higher pressure situation where the regulations need to be updated, and maybe even regulate this body of water apart from the rest of our Northeast region, due to the fact that it is a closed off area. But again, tagging would give us all sorts of information about that stuff.
Yeah, I got you. I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout.
as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, Mirror, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this would be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion.
Yeah, so, I mean, when did you actually start No Kidding chartering in that area?
Well, the paddle charter is what I started on, and that would, I think that would be 2012, 2013, somewhere in that range, I believe, maybe 2014. It's hard for me to remember at this point. I was paddle fishing the whole time. I just wasn't chartering. The chartering started right around the time I started hanging out in Guana and North Guana Outpost, and that's the shop that I do a lot of my referrals out of and paddle fish with. But around 2013, 2014, when I started paddling, I started guiding. About a year after that, and the boat charters, I've been doing that for about 2.5, going on 3 years now. So that was started around 2000. Probably 2016, 2017.
Okay.
But been about 5 years total guiding, 2 years on the paddle boards, 3 years on the boat. So yeah, around 2014, 2015.
Okay. And predominantly fly fish or conventional? Or?
No, that's another thing that I'm awfully proud to say I kind of taught myself how to do. I did a little bit of fly fishing as a kid in freshwater streams when I'd go camping in like Davidson River, North Carolina. A little bit out in Yosemite when I was there with family, but it was more or less just me I saw a guy fly fishing one day, and I was just fascinated with it, like the movements, how you cast, the differences in the fishing methods and approaches and presentations, and just thought it was cool. And then when I got back into our North Florida fishery here, I learned about a fishery called the flood tide. The flood tide, if you know about it, extends from about Central Florida up through about South Carolina, maybe parts of North Carolina, but it's mainly to do with that armpit in the southeastern seaboard that collects a swelling of water during the summer months with the bigger moons and bigger tides. Mm-hmm. And we get huge tides, which brings redfish into the interior of the grass flats, into areas that are usually dry, and these redfish tail hard and back and slither and do all the redfishy behaviors that are fun. Well, it just so happens that the predominant way of catching fish in the flood tide is on fly, because they're eating really small crabs and baby bait items that are in the grasses. So the fly is ideal for catching these fish. And I heard about that and figured that'd be a good way to kind of cut my teeth on the fly, and went out into the flood tide, caught a few fish on fly with that. Black Fly Outfitter is our local fly people up here, and I got my flies from them, kind of learned a few things, and ended up just kind of another self-taught thing. I just kind of dove headlong into it. Yeah. And I'm one of those people that if something interests me, I'll YouTube it, I'll research it. I'll spend months figuring it completely out and go do it and become, at least half decent at it. But yeah, I got into fly fishing and I liked it, and I decided I wanted to start tying flies because I heard that was one of the coolest things you could do is you can make your own lures. I mean, it's not easy to do that with, spinning tackle, which is what I usually fish. So started tying my own flies, just staring at YouTube videos. Spent about 3 months staring at YouTube videos, tying flies, ruining materials, and all that good stuff. But eventually tied a couple patterns that looked like they were going to get eaten. Took them into the flood tide, got my eats, and have never looked back since. That's
cool, man.
If I can only do fly, I would, but I do a combination of spin as well. I'm a topwater junkie. If I could throw topwater all day, every day, that's all I would do. But I like fly fishing as well as the spin tackle. But if I could have my way, I would do the fly just because it's a little more active. You're constantly stripping, feeding, false casting, and it's fun. It's also fun to strip set, that direct connection to the fish where you're just kind of hanging on there, yanking on them like That's you can feel the fish a little bit more on the fly line.
Yeah, I bet. So I mean, but for your convention, you talk about top waters. I mean, do you have certain top waters that you rely on a little bit more, or which ones?
I'm pretty cliche when it comes to that. Spook Junior, man, spooks all day.
Yeah. Bone,
there's something about the way
color?
they move. I think the pitch of them, like the rattle, the pitch of the rattle, the noise that it makes. It's more of a higher pitched rattle than a lower pitched, like the mirror lure top dog, for example. More of a low pitched, harder, heavier rattle. I think the pitch is good. Also, just the way they move really clean. They, the walk and the dog method, they have a hard side to side swing which keeps that plug in the strike zone longer. It keeps it in the water longer, which all means you're probably going to get more eats if it's behaving better. The rear end of the plug sits down a little bit in the water, which gives these fish a bit more of a chance to suck it under the water. It gets hard for them to suck a really buoyant plug under the water, so you're going to get more short strikes on occasion doing that. I don't get nearly as many short strikes on the spook. Really easy to throw. I mean, you can bomb that thing with a slight downwind, almost 60 yards sometimes. So you can really bomb those plugs. But yeah, I'm a big spook fan. If the water gets a bit more choppy, the water's moving more, the plug isn't, is a little too buoyant or light, I'll size up to, a MirrOlure top dog or a top pup, something with a little bit more body, a little bit more density that's going to cut through that chop a little bit better. I even use some of the, with clients, I have a lot of clients that sometimes struggle to walk the dog. It's a bit of a technical rhythm that you have to achieve. But if I'm having a client that's struggling on occasion to get the dog walking, I will use the MirrOlure. I think it's either the Papa Mullet or the Popper plug, but it's basically just like a popping plug with a concave nose that likes to spit a little bit more. Yeah. But if they can't get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 women back and forth, they can just hit it 1, 2, or 3 times, and it will twitch and spit. And I've still got good eats on that as well. Okay. I mean, I get trout that eat my popping corks. If I use a popping cork with a live bait or a paddle tail on occasion, this fish will get so aggressive, they'll look up and see a popping cork twitch and they'll eat the popping cork. And I have teeth marks all over my corks. That's usually funny. I have to retire my corks because they just get chunks taken out of them by aggressive trout. This place is pretty unique in the sense they really like to attack things that are twitching. Most of my baits that I throw are twitch baits, something that is mimicking a wounded bait fish of some sort.
Yeah, so like your 17s, 27s.
Yep, 17s, 27s is about as big as I can go. The delicate game you have to play in the lagoon that I fish in is that it's so shallow, you can't go too big. So, you and I have talked about this, and it is a common trout topic. And as far as big trout is, big baits, big fish. Mm-hmm. And that's true. Big trout have a monstrous mouth and big teeth and a big gut, so they can fit some large baits in their face. And you can throw some monster swim baits and plugs and top waters and still get your eats. But the problem is a lot of those will sink a little bit faster. It's hard to find a bait that's over 4 to 5 inches that doesn't sink a little too fast to be able to work it, because you only have 3 feet of water usually to work with. So if it's sinking, a foot a second, that's going to be hard to work that bait without getting it into the mud. You can't really use like big X-Wraps that have big lips because they'll dive too deep and you'll just be trawling the bottom. It does seem like a lot of what we land on is the MirrOlure twitch baits, the 17s, the 27s, the things that will, slow sinking, slow suspending.
Sure.
Those ones are going to be able to work the column a little bit better, stay out of the mud for you. Something I've been messing with lately. I haven't done a whole lot with it, but I know it does work. It's just a little harder to throw on occasion if it's windy. But really big, unweighted soft plastics, big paddle tails like the Slayer SST XLs. Even some of what I would really like to throw is just those big largemouth bass baits that like it's a rainbow trout that's the size of your hand. Like I would love to be able to throw something like that at some of these larger groups of fish when they're around. But it's just a little too heavy. But things like that you can work the mid to upper column of water without getting into the mud are most effective.
And a lot of those swim baits that you can rig weightless actually provide that capability of actually they are a heavy and a very dense bait. But honestly, the Berkeley Sick Fish or the Optimum Baby Boom Boom, these are bigger, larger bodied swim baits, just kind of like the SST XL. The Yum Money Minnow. I mean, you can keep going, but honestly, rigging those puppies weightless, even with a little 1/8 ounce, as that paddle tail is kicking, it's still staying up pretty high in the actual column itself. So that's definitely, I can see a pretty optimal way to target those fish.
And that's another reason I like fly fishing is you can make a big fly that's still almost completely weightless. That's one of the reasons that the fly fishing can be so effective in that area. And you might have to work for it and do a lot of blind casting, because if you don't see your fish or you're not sure where they are, but you can use some really big flies while keeping your weight low and your presentation natural. So it's been pretty successful in there for fly.
I got you. So I wanted to kind of stay on that topic, right? Because that's a super segue to our cliffhanger from before, and that is one of the best pictures, man. Probably, I had seen a myriad of different companies post, top pictures from 2019 that were shared in their page and got the most likes and this, that, and the other thing. I don't do that stuff. I try to stay kind of out of the mainstream.
Social media trends, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, social media trends, if that's a trend, we're probably typically doing something else, because we like to just kind of do our own thing. Anyway,
stay ahead of the game, man.
Yeah, I guess, or be way far behind, right? So it's one of the two. We don't care. We honestly, man, we just enjoy sharing a passion. But one of those pictures, without a doubt, that probably got the most likes, shares, everything else. I think it reached, I can't remember. I know we're kind of texting back and forth. It was like close to maybe 80. Actually, no, I think it was more than that. I think it was like 120,000 people.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Pretty ridiculous.
It was awesome.
And that was one of the trout you caught with a redfish tail hanging out of its mouth. And so when I make the thumbnail for this podcast, I'm using that picture.
You got to. That's a great one. I'll be resharing that photo for years to come. That's another one of those things. That's like my second best fishing moment ever. I don't know if it'll ever happen again.
So run us through it, man. Run us through it.
Well, it was an early morning. Typically, we're all trout fishermen here. We all know early morning, late evening, low light hours. It's topwater time. So I think it was sometime in August when that happened. It was kind of a midsummer topwater bite. It had been really good. We were actually really catching a lot of redfish on topwater, and it was consistent redfish numbers. 20 to 30 were fish on top in the mornings from redfish and these big schools, and occasionally good trout in between. We were also catching a lot of 18-inch redfish, 16-inch redfish, 17, 18, 19, like small juveniles that were just really juiced up and really smacking plugs. We went out with a buddy of mine, Drew Brule, and we started working the bank. And we were getting a lot of those 18, 19, occasionally slot reds, occasionally smaller trout, but mainly just a lot of redfish. And the area we were in, I knew there was some good trout around, and we got to kind of weed through them to get to the trout. But I was using, of course, my spook, sticking to the old reliable, and doing a lot of intentional pauses. I really like those intentional pauses. As you know, that a lot of times that's when fat lazy fish that doesn't want to chase down a bait will change her mind and come on over and smack one. I was on a pause, I believe, and it was actually a really lazy take. I just pitched it straight to the bank, gave it a couple of pops, let it sit. Heard the impact. It wasn't a very big flare of water. It wasn't anything that significant that would cue me right away that it's a huge fish. But when it came tight and started pulling it in, I noticed it just felt funny. It felt like it was dead weight, so I knew it was a solid fish, or it felt like it could have been a decent redfish that I, had foul hooked. So it just felt weird. And I told my buddies, it feels like it's a big fish, but it just feels weird, and it didn't really fight much. Kind of just swam toward the boat, and I got it rail side, and I can't remember exactly what I said. Honestly, I don't remember what I said. I probably yelled or started cussing. I don't know. I just remember telling my buddy, dude, it finally happened. It finally happened. It finally happened. And the reason I say that is because the only other guy I know that has done this and has a picture of this is Anthony Chilla, Crusher.
Chilla, yep.
He's had this happen to him before, and he told people about it. And I think it actually made it into Texas Trout Magazine. It was a big deal. He found I think it was a
that
30,
picture's still everywhere. That picture is absolutely everywhere.
I think it's a 32, maybe a 33. It was a monster, but had a redfish tail coming out of its mouth. And unfortunately, the fish was pretty much already gone when he found her. He found her floating upright. But he had that fish mounted on his wall with the redfish tail coming out of its mouth, which is just probably one of the sickest mounts you could ever see. But I know he'd done it before, and I had actually found one other trout in there before, same situation, dead and dying, with a giant pogie stuck in her throat. It wasn't a redfish, but a pogie.
Interesting.
Yeah, we get some pelagic pogies that will sneak in there now and then, and they're bigger than these trout are used to. But she choked on that one. It was only about a 26-inch fish, but she was choking on a pogie. So I know this happened, and I've also had some small trout and small reds attacked on my clients' lines. I've had another client had a redfish swallowed that was on his popping cork line that was reeling in, and I saw the fish get boat side, but it spit the fish out. It looked like the fish was about 34 inches. It was an absolutely monster trout, and it ate my client's redfish, redfish actually had like 18 spots on it, which was kind of neat, but it was only like I think like a 14-inch redfish, and we were skiing across top of the water, got eaten, the fish came boat side, saw the boat, threw its head, and literally spit the fish back at the boat, and that's one of the crazier things I've seen. But on this morning, we were throwing the top water plug, got to eat, and got the fish boat side, and looked down and started saying, "It finally happened! It finally happened!" The fish was still in the trout's mouth, and you and I kind of had like a back and forth along with some of the people that were on the forum about whether, I caught the redfish and then the trout ate the redfish, or I caught the trout and the trout had already eaten the redfish. And the conclusion ended up being that I caught the trout and the redfish was already in its throat, because the take was a trout take. It wasn't like it was a redfish that ate and then got eaten. I didn't feel anything happen after I got the fish. So it was just dead weight the whole time, which means that trout had an 18-inch redfish lodged in her throat and in her gut. She looked up and saw my spook and went, "Why not?" and smacked it. And I got her boat side and pulled her up and held her in the water. I knew I was going to have to get some serious pictures of this. So I got Drew with the camera and pulled her out of the water, got all the photos that you can see on Chris's profile. And it was really cool. Ended up taking the redfish out of the trout's throat it was a pretty delicate process. It wasn't great for the fish, but I knew if I left the fish in, she's going to die. There's no way. I mean, the tail was all the way out of the jaw. I even tried shoving the fish in a little bit. It was clear that it was bottomed out right in the bottom of the stomach. So worked it out, got it out. The redfish was still alive. So
no way.
Yeah, redfish definitely been eaten within the last 20, 30 minutes or so. And it wasn't even really scarred up or anything. She just basically inhaled the thing head first. But yeah, still alive, and I actually threw him in the water, and I think he swam off. I wasn't really concerned about the redfish at that point, but I think the redfish swam off, and then we started taking care of the trout. It took a little bit to get her going, but she did swim off. Hopefully she made it. She was in a little bit of rough shape, but I'd rather give her the shot of swimming away than try and harvest her. But yeah, probably the second coolest thing that's ever happened to me. I mean, it could happen again, but it's just one of those things that it's hard to think you're going to see it twice in one lifetime. But big old nasty hungry trout.
And so the caption, and I want to kind of touch on this just a little bit. The caption underneath your photo, and I think I even put it as well, and there was another picture, Trey Pry. There's been instances that I've seen in my own fishing endeavor. Dude, these fish, so your caption is, "I always say big trout are some of the most savage fish that swim. Now I can prove it." Dude, Trey Pry said, if these fish grew to like 100 pounds, I wouldn't step foot in the water.
That was my favorite comment I've ever seen about a trout right there. It's so true.
They are savages, man. The fact that this thing's just got a belly full of redfish and still goes, you know what? Why not? And it also kind of lends true to my own personal belief is, dude, when that feeding window is open, it's irrelevant what that fish is eating. When that feeding window is open, they're just going to demolish whatever's around, and then they're going to go and lay somewhere. So it goes back to Mike McBride and a podcast we did, and a lot of other big trout guys across the coast and here in the Texas coast, is that it's knowing when to be where, where to be when, right? And just kind of figuring out when to target those big fish and being those windows around those big fish. That separates the men from the boys in terms of from an angling perspective. So
absolutely.
But I couldn't, dude, savages.
Yeah. There's the most violent inshore fish I think there is, besides maybe tarpon and snook. I mean, but they have their own nastiness. They're just, it's hard to explain over a microphone, but you know the feeling, Chris, when you hold that bucket mouth open, and you look down and you see the teeth and you see the yellow, and it's just a huge fish, and they're just nasty. I mean, seeing some of the things they do to other fish, the way they behave on the line, the head throws, and
Oh my God.
the snaps. I mean, I'll have to post it for you, but I do have a video of me holding that. The fish that I caught with the redfish in its mouth ended up being 28 inches long, and it weighed 9 pounds with the 18-inch redfish still inside of it. So how much it actually weighed is still up for debate, but it was a 28-incher. It was about 9 pounds, and I have a video when I hold her out of the water, and I explain, I'm waiting for this to happen. It finally happened, and I pull the fish out of the water, and I have the boga grips on her lip, and I open her bottom jaw so they can see the redfish clearly, and she gives this snap where the pop. It's almost like an alligator closing their mouth real fast.
Yeah.
And just everything about these fish is just mean. They're just mean. I mean, and especially the fact that they're mostly female too. I mean, it just makes it even better. Just big, mean, nasty girls. Like, I love just calling them the big, nasty girls. I mean, they're just mean, and it's special. They're a special and nasty fish, and they're things they can do at the end of the line and the way they behave is just incredible. They're just an amazing fish.
And that's the thing, and the bigger they get, the meaner they get, right? And so until you actually hold, one of those big fish and kind of get really bitten by the big trout bug, because once you catch one of those big giants, man, and see that this is a different animal. I mean, this is a different fish. And so until you do that, all of a sudden you have this better respect and appreciation. And then all of a sudden you're like, dude, I want to do it again. Like you get bitten by, or this addiction, man. It's crazy, dude. And they just do that to you. And it's just, like you said, they just become and have these various characteristics. Actually 4 weeks ago. I haven't shared the picture, but ended up catching a 31.5, a little over 16.5 inch girth.
That's
here on a jerkbait. Yeah, she was right at 10 pounds. And dude, set the hook, and it was the craziest thing. It's so hard to describe, but it was this subtle savage slurp. Seriously, man. So I'm working a shadow wrap, twitch, got my cadence on a long pause, and all of a sudden you just feel this, like, it was almost like you could feel the rush of water. Like it just went.
I didn't even have mouth open and pulled it in.
I didn't have to set the hook, dude. As soon as I hit it, she came up, man, and just started shaking away from me because she had that jerk, and I got a great picture of that jerk bait, man. And so actually what happened is one of the hooks broke off on the tail end, which is crazy because I've never had an owner SD36 actually just shear off. But two of the other hooks that were on that bottom treble were actually in the top roof of her mouth, and the other 6 hooks that were on the jerk bait weren't even coming close to being hooked. So I've literally just had her pinned by the upper back of the throat, dude, and she was just not happy.
Yeah. No, they don't like it. Roof of the mouth and in the rakers is when you get some violent reactions where they do those beautiful head throws, catwalks. I mean, you know what I've noticed too on fly, they do it more. And I think it's because the fly, when they inhale the fly, it does tend to go further to the back of their throat because it's so much lighter. And they basically, when they inhale a fly, they're getting like a mouthful of air instead of a hard bait or a soft bait to chew on. So you tend to get hooked more towards the rakers and the back of the throat with some of these flies. And the reactions that you get, me and my buddy Drew have come up with a term for it. We call it the dead weight hang. And if you come tight to a big trout on fly, for the first few seconds to maybe even 5 seconds, the trout doesn't react. It's not really sure what's going on. And once you start really tugging on her and you go through your strip set and you start coming tight and you start pulling and start trying to clear line, all of a sudden she'll just freak out. They'll either come out of the water like a tarpon, catwalking and head throwing, or they go on a 30-yard run and basically put you into your backing right off the bat. It's a very violent reaction. It's not so much as a thump as it is just like it feels like you're stuck. You pull tight, and all of a sudden you get this beautiful reaction. So yeah. I mean God, I'm getting the chills just sitting here thinking about it right now, man. You're making me sick for it right now, man. I want to go get some, and the weather's all crappy outside. God,
I'm ready to go get it, man. I'm ready to get it.
But that with snook, it's like thump life. With trout, it's just the visual and the feeling and the head shakes, and it's just.
It's indescribable.
It really is. Watching a trout in the 28, 27 plus inch range catwalk across the water, throwing its head watching the gill plates flare up to where you can see through their mouth just like a tarpon, and all the water getting thrown around, and it's just violent. The best way that I can describe a big trout fight is it's just violent. It's just mean, and they're nasty. If you're listening and you've never done it, just go keep fishing until you catch one, and you'll know what we're talking about. It's incredible.
Yep. Big nasty girls.
Big nasty.
That's awesome. That's it. That's awesome, man. Well, brother, I can't believe it. Because I honestly, man, I want to end it there because I'm fired up. I'm sure people listening hopefully are fired up. And we're at about an hour, man. I always try to keep them about an hour, man. But dude, we covered a lot, and honestly, I appreciate you just giving me a lot of insight to the area that you're fishing. Very unique area, the close-knit kind of group of anglers that are kind of there, kind of taking care of a fishery, and kind of you guys' pursuit for that, right? And understanding that. I think it's lost on a lot of anglers across the coast that there are these other areas, man. So a lot of guys in the lower Laguna Madre, if you've never been here, Matt, is very unique, man. It sounds similar to Guana, where there is just this expansive Laguna Madre, just base system, really, that's flat. Almost the entire thing's wadeable. Couple shell, a lot of grass, very clear water to some extent. When that wind gets cranking, obviously it changes, but you'll have no guy, you'll have these deer just kind of grazing all over creation. So there's just this various fishery or uniqueness about this fishery. And then you'll go to some place like you're talking about, the Guana Reserve, and it's just also a very unique fishery. The commonalities, though, is that they both don't have tide and they have huge gator trout. And so that's where you start to go, okay, well, yeah, I don't necessarily fish Guana, but I fished lower Laguna Madre. And so some of the stuff that we discuss can kind of transcend and cross over from what you're talking about to kind of what I'm doing in my fishery. But anyway, bro, I just appreciate you sharing.
Not a problem, man.
It's all,
man. I mean, that's what this forum is for. And so if I take a second to gloat on what you're doing, I mean, getting all these people together, getting people that are willing to share information, and, not so much to exploit a fishery, but to understand it and to better be able to respect this fishery and learn more is amazing. And like I said, I'm kind of a, self-taught person in the sense that no one really taught me how to trout fish. I just went and figured it out. But having people like you spreading information and knowledge, and people like your dad who are invaluable in the trout community because they have so many years of knowledge. There's no replacement for time spent on the water and understanding your fishery, your estuary, and your target species. And being able to, rely on a forum like this to share some information, to understand that, and to pass forward this knowledge so we can, better regulate and understand and respect the fishery is huge. And, what I like to always say to a lot of my clients, the difference between a fisherman and an angler is that a fisherman just wants to go get a tug. An angler wants to understand the why, the how, the when, and all the science behind these fish. And that's where you draw an innate respect for these amazing creatures. So you just got to say thank you for putting together this forum and keeping track of these catches and, connecting the dots. You're helping everybody connect the dots.
And so I'll leave it with that because you are one of the only people, minus Todd Willis over at Neuse River Bait and Tackle up in North Carolina. You and him are really the only two people that I've sent actual state citation stickers to. And that way, if people did book a charter with you and they've heard of Speckled Truth, or even if you offer it to them, but they do hook a citation size trout, a 27-inch plus with you, you can give them a citation sticker there. Now, obviously, the Dirty 30 box, I'll still mail it to them. And so you kind of keep us in a loop on that. But the thing is you're helping us grow the data set in kind of a more micro climate way in terms of your own uniqueness. But also it's also hopefully helping you kind of keep track and understand a little bit more of your fishery. So for anybody who's listening out there and you want to kind of go experience a Guana Reserve, and give Matt, and you follow Speckled Truth, man, you want to look for that citation, whatever it is, I would say give Matt a call. I don't do plugs often, so it's kind of making me extremely uncomfortable.
I appreciate it, sir.
But no, I appreciate it, man. I do, bro. And thanks for participating in the program and being such a huge supporter for us over the course of time, man. And I've always looked forward to your post, man. The one you actually made the other day which I thought was really cool. It was very awesome write-up. You can caption a photo very, very well.
I appreciate
and
it.
it was just the fangs, man. Kind of the focus of the picture was on the fangs of the fish, and you just did this huge long write-up about, more or less how beautiful these are, and kind of the shape of the mouth, and how the shape of the mouth dictates kind of where these fish feed in a column, and what they use these more or less fangs for in terms of ripping and slashing at baits. And so again, it goes back to the biology of understanding these fish, and just kind of the shape, no kidding, the shape of the mouth, and kind of that naturally kind of gives them the ability to feed and kind of that upward momentum. So anyway, man, I appreciate kind of all the things that you do, bro.
Not a problem, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, for everyone else, thank you. This is going to air actually probably in the next week or so. So this will be kind of like in mid-January. And so for folks that are following with us kind of maybe on the Biloxi Gulf Coast area or on the Gulf Coast area, we're actually going to be at the Mississippi Gulf Coast Coliseum the first week, the 6th through the 8th of February at the Biloxi Boat Show. In addition to that, we'll also be at the Mobile Boat Show, which will be in the first weekend in March. So I encourage you, if you've ever kind of been out there or to the boat shows and you want to just honestly, man, come and see us and talk trout fishing, because that's what we do, is literally just talk about trout fishing, answer any questions, talk openly about kind of what we see and techniques. And if you want to learn how to tie a loop knot or a uni to uni or an FG knot, or if you want to take a look at the baits that we throw and how we throw them, and on the rods that we do that, we open that kind of forum, and we do that then. So if you're on the Gulf Coast in either February or March during those first weekends, I invite you to come out and come check us out. We will have our live trout that we've talked about at length in the booth. And so just come out, man, and just take a look at them, see them, appreciate them, talk trout fishing, and we'd love to see you there and meet you. But outside of that, we really appreciate everybody's support. Thank you for listening to the Speckled Truth podcast. Obviously, also need to thank Mirror Texas Custom Lures, the original Custom Corky, and Mossy Oak Fishing for the support for this podcast. Again, without their support, none of this is possible. So show them some love as well. But outside of that, guys, I want to always kind of leave it with that, man, is that take what you need, release the rest, take care, and God bless. Take care.